We are going to jump in, and to be frank, it's going to be next to impossible to sum up 27 chapters of Matthew for you. So let me just catch you up of where we were just recently. We were left in chapter 27 that the tomb was sealed, and the challenge was accepted, which we're going to talk about in a minute. The challenge was accepted. Seal it up to the best of your ability is what chapter 27 said, I believe verse 59, right? So we're saying, like, honestly, we walk out of here on Friday nights, and we are hopeless. And when I say hopeless, just Christians, leverage this mentality for a second. How sad, and this is what to be pitied above all people in 1 Corinthians 15 is talking about. How sad is your life to give up your entire life to a false God? I mean, that's such a sad display of devotion. That's put in front of us as we walk out the door at the end of Friday. And then we turn the page to chapter 28, and we find out that's not the rest of the story, right? Or that's not the end of the story. We find out the rest of the story, what's going on. So let's get after it. Here's what takes place after the tomb is sealed to the best of their ability. Verse 1, now after the Sabbath, towards the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. We're going to go through this verse by verse as we do. So it's going to be a big Bible study together like we do every Sunday. If you can, just notice, so here's the Marys, and it says they went to, quote, see the tomb. I think this preserves the theme of witness. I tried to tell you last week that the women are the last at the crucifixion, and they're the first at the resurrection. So that's what we're seeing in this narrative, and that's the case here. Before we read verse 2, just so you know, it was kind of a cultural thing, but Jews actually checked on the graves for the first 3 days just in case they accidentally did bury somebody alive. Just as a point of reference, you can read about that in Longstaff's book, The Women at the Tomb. But verse 2, and behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes white as snow. Nerd out with me for a second. This isn't particular to the text, but this is so legit. Okay, the book of Matthew starts, here's where it starts, with generations of believers, okay? All those genealogies in chapter 1. The first story is an angel talking to Mary. The book of Matthew ends with an angel talking to Mary, and then Jesus telling his disciples to go make more disciples of all generations. I mean, that's legit, right? I know it's the last service, but I'm preaching right now. Come on, let's get it, okay? It was amazing. Okay? So verse 2, it says, and behold, to be particular on our text. You got to make a grammatical decision here. This is the word gar in Greek. It could mean as the angel descends, when he hits the earth, he causes the earthquake, or God causes an earthquake to kind of announce that this angel is coming. That's a decision that you can make. I will say, we see in our text the stone is rolled away, and then this angel, and we've talked about the discrepancy between an angel and other angels at other Easters. For the sake of time, I don't want to get into that now, but I've given apologetic to understand the word better there. But this angel is sitting on the stone. Matthew wants to hone in on this specific angel, which to me is a weird detail. It almost feels like if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, Merry and Pippin, after defeating Isengard, smoking their pipeweed, right? And going, welcome, right? There's this sense of like, yeah, this is weird. Why are you just sitting on the stone that's rolled away, just sitting there? There's an angel. It's just kind of weird, I guess, just to me, but it's just kind of rolled there, and he's sitting on it. And I do want to draw the attention, the stone being rolled away is a big deal. In the Gospel of Mark, and you can write this down if you want to, in Mark 16, verses 2 through 4, Mark lets us into the narrative. The Marys are walking to the tomb in the Gospel of Mark. And so Matthew just picks it up with them at the tomb. And there's a conversation that they're having. Mark says, in their conversation, it says, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, who will roll this stone away for us at the entrance of the tomb? So they're wondering when they get there, how's the stone going to be rolled away? And it says at the end of verse 4, because it was a very large stone. So it's a larger than normal stone. They're wondering how this is going to take place. Well, an angel has appeared and done all that work for them. Now, the camera shifts over to the soldiers that are to keeping watch over this tomb. Verse 4, and for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. Now, we actually have a word in English that defines this perfectly. It's actually our word petrified. If you're familiar with the word petrified. To be petrified is to be so scared that you don't move like a stone. That's where the word petrified comes from. And so this word, what we have is these soldiers, the statement there, for fear, the guards became like dead men. Now, this matters if you're a goat because it's called fainting goat syndrome. But if you're a human, this matters because anybody who's ever experienced first responders or anybody in the military, you're trained to not do this. This is what you're trained for. Now, it's curious because the Roman soldiers historically are like the top of the line when we talk type of training, right? I mean, these are not like beer belly type of dudes. These guys are disciplined homies. And so as they stand there, they are. So let me ask you a question. what would it take for an army ranger to be petrified? I mean, Roman soldiers are training with swords, bows, and arrows. They're aware of ambushes. Ain't nobody preparing for a heavenly being descending on the earth, right? And so here this heavenly being descends on the earth and they're petrified. That tells us the bigness of the moment. That's how big this moment really is of what's going on. Verse 5. But the angel said to the women, okay, so he doesn't even acknowledge the soldiers who are petrified. He says to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. So the women are also afraid. But he says, I know you're seeking Jesus. He was crucified. He's not here, for he has risen, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay, then go quickly and tell the disciples that he has risen from the dead. And behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. See, I have told you. We could draw our attention to that statement there, come see the place where he lay. The angel speaks to these women, and I don't know how far into the tomb they actually go. Imagine the tomb probably the size of like a large tiny house, so a large tiny house, depending on whose tomb it was and where it was. They go in and they get to look to some extent. And I want you, if you could see in verse 6, that you can see it tells them to come and see. And then I want you to notice in verse 7, this both and is something that believers have been doing for 2,000 years. Come and see the body and then go and tell. You see that? I mean, I think that's maybe a side note, but a beautiful mantra as they see that. If you could also draw your attention there to verse 6, the angel wants to make it clear, as he said. So he's talking about Jesus. He's raised from the dead, as he said. I tried to tell you 4 weeks ago, as we enter into the passion narrative, it's going to feel chaotic. It's going to feel like all these things are taking place to Jesus and he has no control over it. But the dude is in control. He's in control the whole time. And the angel wants to make this clear. He said all this was going to happen. He said he was going to be raised from the dead. And Matthew always draws our attention backwards, and that's what's happening here as well. Just as he said, I'm going to punt that statement as the angel tells the women to go tell the disciples to meet him at Galilee. That statement there, that he's going before you to Galilee, because that's where we're going to pick up next week, and it actually appears here in the text. Verse 8, so they depart. The women leave, as the angel told them, to go tell the disciples. So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to tell the disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, greetings. And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. So there's a few things to draw out from this. First of all, they're on the way to go tell the disciples, and Jesus appears, and he just says greetings, right? A part of me is like, dog, where have you been, right? And he just appears, greetings. Now, before we get to that interaction there, if I could draw your attention to the emotions the Bible's actually putting on the women. Notice, as they depart there, they leave with, quote, fear and great joy. Now, this is going to be important to the grand narrative of what we're going to read in our entire text, so let me explain it. If you can, imagine for a second, as believers, the roof of this building completely ripped off. And we look to the sky, and we see Jesus on a white horse. Okay, I know it's crazy, but it's biblical. Okay, so we see Jesus. As we see, correct me if I'm wrong here, you're feeling in real time a good kind of fear. This is like freaky, this is wild. But at the same time, you're settling in to go, finally. Like, I've been waiting for this moment. So though it is a healthy fear, there's also this joy, this excitement. To a milder extent, you can almost think of a bride and groom as they get married. There's a sense of like fear and trepidation, like, man, we're going to get married, this is a big deal. But also like a lot of excitement and a lot of joy. They're feeling this as they leave the tomb to go tell the disciples. And I think that's worth drawing out, because we're going to see it in a second. Well, Jesus meets them, and he tells them essentially what the angel told them. I do want to just point out exegetically, he tells them to go tell my brothers. My brothers has not been in the book of Matthew at all in a reference to only the 12 disciples, okay? So this is going to be important for next week, but as they go forward, it's always a reference to Adelphos as this brothers and sisters. So this idea of all the followers of Jesus. I don't think it all would mean be limited to the apostles. Okay, verse 11. Now, before I read verse 11, I want to remind you of chapter 27, verse 59 again. Chapter 27, verse 59 was challenge accepted, that ultimately they did their best to keep him down. And listen, like I said, the plays tend to portray, church plays tend to portray, here's this great Easter scene, and you got a 45-year-old CEO who loves Jesus, and he's playing a Roman soldier. He's got a beer belly. He doesn't know what he's doing up there. And I kind of just like, oh, that's cute. That's not a Roman soldier. Let me double down on that. A Roman soldier, a commander could at will slaughter a Roman soldier if he felt like he was not disciplined enough. Keep that in mind as we read this narrative, okay? It's going to be really important for this narrative. Verse 11. While they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests that all had taken place. And when they had assembled with them, the elders had taken counsel. They gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, "Tell people his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ear, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the plan is simple enough, verses 11 through 14 there. I mean, you have this idea that here's our plan. Let's just say, soldiers, you fell asleep. Upon falling asleep, the disciples came and took the body, and that's all we know, right? Now, we're going to come back to that whole interaction, why it's bizarre. What I will draw your attention to is that statement there. They're willing to do this for, quote, a sufficient amount of funds. This actually tells us three things. Number one, this seems to be par for the course for the Sanhedrin, who's the governing body over the Jews, because the same word for silver that we saw with Judas is actually used here. So they seem to bribe or pay off people pretty often. It tells us the second thing, they probably have a large amount of money. So I don't know if it's all through just gains, but Jesus calls a lot of this stuff out in his ministry. And then number three, I just need you to understand the totality of what sufficient funds would mean, okay? Meaning, if Pilate found out these guards fell asleep, he would instantly kill them. I mean, historically, you do not, as a Roman soldier, fall asleep at your post. That is not something that happens. And so I want you to think, how much money would it take for you to kill somebody, okay? Don't share, it's Easter, it's not a good time to, okay? Like 100,000, like that, okay, like, but how much would it take, right? Hopefully none, because hopefully we want to kill anybody. But here's what, it's got to be so much money that these dudes are willing to take the bag and run. It's got to be that much, because they got to start a whole new life. They ain't going back to Pilate. That's not what's happening there. And this leads us to exactly what takes place in 15. So they took the money and did as they were directed, and this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. Actually, it's interesting. Justin Martyr, in his apology in section 108, addresses the fact that this story was still going on while he's alive. I mean, we have reason to believe that the story that the Jews propagate, that he was just taken by his disciples, was actually still pretty predominant among people who weren't believers in Christianity for the first probably 3 centuries. It's a pretty common thing. But that's the end of our text there. It's spread among the Jews to this day. That's it, okay? Now, there's, I think, 2 things. One is probably more important than the other. The first one is, when we read a text like this, what is clear, and I'll just speak to the believer if I can, verse 9 is what we hope for, is it not? I mean, the resurrection is true. When it says, "And behold, Jesus met them and said, 'Greetings," okay, it's not just an angel said at this point. Dude isn't saying greetings unless he's alive. And so all of the things that we experienced on Friday, the hopelessness that we knew to be true, is suddenly, wait a minute, he's not dead. He actually is alive. And one day he'll return, and like, according to 1 Peter 1, like these women, we will fall actually at his feet and worship him. This is good news for us. That should always be the keystone of Easter, like recognizing, no, he is alive. That's what Matthew 28 at the beginning of is putting in front of us. Now, that being the overarching umbrella, there's actually a subpoint that I think is worth drawing out. When we read a text like this, we slow down sometimes because it's so quick. If you could look at verse 11, the first 4 words. You did something subconsciously at the beginning of verse 11 that I just want to make conscious to everyone in the room, okay? As readers, you read it, and you didn't know you did it, but what's going on is when it says, while they were going, we are forced in that moment to realize that while they were going is the women are going to the disciples. While that's going on, the camera can't follow them anymore. Now the camera comes back and goes, while all that's going on, we go to split screen. And so there's 2 narratives. While this is going on, this other account, verses 10 through 14, or the beginning of 15 is going on. So while this is going on, everything that we read, we get verses 10 all the way to 14, which is the women are going to the disciples, and the soldiers on this other side, the other side of the screen, they're going to the Sanhedrin, okay? So I draw this out for a couple reasons. For both accounts, as the split screen is in place, for both accounts, they have the same starting experience. I mean, if you look at the text, it says they're both experiencing the earth shaking, they're experiencing angels, they're experiencing a dead man coming alive, this declaration of it. They're experiencing the same things. And then the women go to tell the disciples, and then the soldiers go to tell the Sanhedrin, happening simultaneously. The reason this is worth bringing up is, tell me if I'm wrong, but if you were just to read verses 5 through 10, the mood is completely different. Write yourself a mood board on verses 10 through 14, okay? 5 through 10, and then get yourself a mood board on verses 10 through 14. And the mood is drastically different. I mean, just draw it out. On this side, as the women go to see the disciples, they're going there. You have a healthy kind of fear in this text. You have joy that we see in this text. Jesus greets them in this text. They worship. I mean, it seems to be this like amazing. There's this excitement as we read that first part. And then it's like the mood changes in verse 11. While all that's going on, the mood is completely different. So write yourself a mood board with a lot of that we see here. We see they're in secret. All this stuff is being in secret. It's like a smoke-filled room almost. There are bribes involved. There's a worry of punishments. There's lying. And it's not even good lying. Honestly, it's very similar to somebody who's gone on a murder spree and he can't quite get his story straight and the DA's investigating it. Because as you read through what's going on, they recognize it's broken. The story's broken. Let me give you an example of this. I'll ask you this. If the soldiers fell asleep, how do they know the disciples took the body? Like, there's clearly a loophole in their story. And if they were awake, then why didn't they sound the alarm? So there's not. Furthermore, it's capital offense to rob a grave. So this is a big indictment that's going on. And so as we see this story, we can see there's all this fault. And there's a reason. There's a reason that as the women go tell the disciples that you read it, and it's exciting, it's worshipful, it's joyous, it's healthy fear. And this side, it's lying, it's bribery, it's in secret. The reason is this story is rooted in failure. This story is rooted in they did their best to hold Jesus down, and they failed. To the best of their ability, they tried to do this, and they failed. And this story is rooted in victory. This story over here seems to indicate and show us we thought we lost, but actually we win. When it's all said and done, he really did raise from the dead. I walk out of here on Friday. That's not the end of the story as I know it. This is good news. But what Matthew is doing, he's not keeping that story out there. You're a reader today. And there's first century, the original readers. And as they read this account, they are forced to choose one of these two options. Just like you are forced to choose one of these two options. Let me just speak candidly to you if you're not a believer in here. If you're not a believer in here, the two options in front of you are the same. You got to make the same decision that all of us have made as believers. On one side, as the facts are being presented, you can choose to accept that as true. You can see the reality of it. You can find joy in it. You can find victory in it. You can find hope in it. That's true. The other side, if you are being intellectually integrous, okay, as you look at the facts, and you aren't just doing some shallow curiosity, like watching a 5-minute YouTube video on like, oh, I see why Jesus' resurrection isn't true, but search it out, okay? If you're being honest with yourself, you are forced to delete about 95% of human history by the rubric you're using to say that it's not true. Because the way we understand history to not just quantify, but qualify, and to assure us that this really did take place as fact, 2.1 billion people are going to celebrate this fact today. As you look at that, there's a worldview challenge. I mean, you're sitting there and somebody, and maybe the church hasn't done a good job to tell you this, but you're wrong. What you believe about Jesus is wrong. There's another challenging worldview coming in front of you that's saying a man rose from the dead. Jesus rose from the dead. And now here's the second option. First option is to accept it. Second option is you could see the facts for what they are, and you can push them under the rug. You can try to convince yourself, shift the truth around. You can do whatever you need to pacify because you like to do you, because that's what you like. Now, those are the options in front of you. Those are the options in front of you. As you wrestle with it, you've got eventually, at least for eternity, you've got to arrive at one of those options. Now, before you make that decision, can I tell you why 2.1 billion people have chosen to follow the path of Mary to the disciples? Why this narrative is better. 2.1 billion people are going to worship Jesus. The reason this narrative is better, from your perspective, you might look and accuse us, and I think you don't probably have a good understanding of Christianity, but you would look and you would go, all you care about is being holy, and I don't care about holiness. And it's true, the resurrection assures us, according to Romans chapter 4, because the resurrection is true, our justification is true. It's true. Or you guys think, you just want to be better people, you're learning to be like God. Well, that's true. Yes, the resurrection assures us, according to Romans 6, that what is called our sanctification is sealed. That's true. Or you're going to die, you're going to leave the earth, okay, and you're going to spend eternity with heaven, you believe you don't die. Well, that is true, because the resurrection is true. According to 1 Corinthians 15, we believe we do not die. That is true, okay? But the problem is, you don't care about any of that. You don't care about eternity, and maybe you do, and you haven't processed to the extent that we have. Or, honestly, you don't care about being holy. That's not a big priority for you, which is fine. So let me entice you with honey for a second and just tell you that even though all of those things are true, they're actually only part of a larger story that you actually do care about. Because here's what I do know. You do care about you. You care about now. You care about your life. When push comes to shove, you do. And so what I want to put in front of you is, even though all these things are true and a big deal, they're part of a bigger story. And that bigger story is what's been thumping in the book of Matthew for 27 chapters. 27 chapters, we have been told it's not that Jesus comes just to save you from your sin. It's the gospel of the kingdom. Jesus comes to bring a kingdom. That's what he's doing. And we saw the ethics of that kingdom in chapters 5 through 7. We saw the parables of the kingdom in chapter 13. I told you, it had to at least be a dozen times. I said that in Matthew, Jesus mentions the gospel of the kingdom, or the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God, more than all of the other gospels combined. Matthew keeps pushing this agenda. Now, the reason that matters is, listen to N.T. Wright in his book, Surprised by Hope. He says the resurrection, I know it's hard to read a quote, it's not on the screen, it's a little longer, so you just have to do your best to track. The resurrection completes the inauguration of God's kingdom. Believers, I hope you heard that. The resurrection completes the inauguration of God's kingdom. It is the decisive event demonstrating that God's kingdom really has been launched on earth as it is in heaven. That is, okay, he goes on to say, because of all this is true, the present bodily life is not valueless just because it will die. What you do in your body in the present matters because God has a future in store for it. So we believe the way that we're interacting with other people before the Lord, or for the Lord, before other people, as we're doing all of this, what I do with my body matters because one day you're going to see Sean on this earth, a resurrected Sean on a resurrected earth. You're going to see me, and it's real. I have a real body, but one day it's going to be a perfect body because the resurrection is true. Now, he's not done. He goes on to say this. What you do with your body in the present matters because God has a future for it. What you do in the present by painting or preaching or singing or parenting or sewing or praying or teaching or building hospitals or digging wells or campaigning for justice or writing poems or caring for the needy or loving your neighbor as yourself will last into God's future. These activities are not simply a way of making the present life a little less beastly, a little more bearable until the day we leave it all behind. That's not what we believe. They're all part of God building his kingdom. And so what I put in front of you is, it's not just the fact that we have hope for eternal life. That's true. But let me tell you the difference. People who are not believers from our worldview and people who are, the mom who's going through postpartum depression and feels anxiety, when she lays her head down at night, yes, she has a hope for eternity. But let me tell you something else she has. She has a peace in this life as well. She has a joy rooted in the resurrection that even though this is difficult, he really did raise from the dead. She has purpose beyond this immediate moment. And what is afforded you in this option is to go, the story of failure, and this is your story. I don't mean just because of you, but the fact that the world has continued to fail you again and again, and you keep going back to it, looking and seeking and trying to find all those things. You've noticed this is a story of failure. What is in front of you is a peace you don't have, a joy you don't have, a hope you don't have, a purpose you don't have. All this is summed up in the resurrection to the tune of 2.1 billion people praising and glorying in Jesus' resurrection because it's true. So let's go a little Southern Baptist, first century. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen. Let's pray.